We turn our focus now to South Africa's Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, that's Alexandra Abrahams. He says that localization must be a national commitment to rebuild productive capacity. He says this will also deepen the value chains and ensure economic growth while creating real opportunities for South Africans. He was speaking at the Buy Local Summit, which is currently taking place in South Africa at the Sandton Convention Centre, and it is hosted by Proudly South African. She cautioned that supporting local production should not shield industries from global competition. And joining us to discuss this further this afternoon is the Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Alexandra Abrahams. A very good afternoon to you, Deputy Minister. Good to have you with us on African Business.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Now, Deputy Minister, the South African government has for a long time championed localization. What are the new measures that the government is implementing in order to make sure that this drive is more effective? What are you doing differently now?
Yes, so it is something we have been doing for quite some time. And I think what's important in the South African context is that it is aimed at driving, economic recovery and reducing unemployment in all sectors of our economy by prioritizing, the local sourcing and purchasing of goods. As you mentioned, yes, it's not the same as protectionism, because we do want our products to be able to compete on an international stage because they are of quality and they're reliable and they're innovative. But what our focus is in how it relates to our trade strategy is that, the DTIC profiles South African local products on international markets, via our outward selling missions, exhibitions and, inward buy missions. And we've also taken on a new strategy. It's called the Butterfly Strategy, where we will be prioritizing 27 new markets, markets that have been identified. And we'll also utilize the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to also expand some of our local products into the continent and once again into other markets. I will say that, during this current financial year, thus far, we've supported over 390 South African companies who have benefited through our export marketing and investment assistance program. So those are just some of the key government programs that we are using to help get our locally produced products out into the market.
And what have you as government identified as perhaps the key gaps, those blind spots in the value chain?
So, as you mentioned earlier, it's not a new topic. So one of the gaps would be that we have an ambitious policy, which sometimes slow down during implementation phase. And, implementation can be affected by many things, such as, the lack of enforcement when it comes to non-compliance or either the poor monitoring and oversight, which can sometimes skew the playing field for businesses who are being compliant and do invest locally. Another aspect could be, infrastructure or structural gaps, challenges with that. It's as you know, South African business, we've been dealing with almost 20 years of unreliable energy supply. And, we're very grateful and relieved that that has now stabilized through multiple of interventions. We also do have some challenges with our ports, which is, taking a whole of government approach just to resolve that, because it is our responsibility as government to create that predictable and enabling environment for, the private sector to thrive. Another gap which we dealing with at the moment is the unfair competition, when it comes to illicit trade, counterfeit goods, dumping, illegal manufacturing operations, which has put some serious pressure on legitimate local producers, particularly in our clothing, textile and footwear and leather industries. And, these illegal operations, they undermine and evade labor practices and human rights violations. And we do need to work more closely with enforcement agencies and have a better enforcement coordination to respond to this rise of illegal manufacturers and the illicit trade.
And what would you highlight as some of the more successful incentives that have been put in place in order to incentivize, to encourage local businesses from sourcing locally? And do you believe that you could actually be doing more in that regard?
Well, I've been in this job for a few months, and let me tell you, everybody that I speak to, all stakeholders, will always say that there is more that government can do, especially when it comes to incentives and the incentives offering. But understandably and realistically, we work within the confines of a budget. So we need to, work within that budget. But then what we need to do as the DTIC is to find those force multiplier industries, the industries that can take R1 and convert it into a R5 investment in the South African economy. So that's what we need to do. And I also think it's important that our investment offerings are competitive and that it also adapts, constantly to the ever-evolving world that we find ourselves in, and that we also take more note of future planning in our incentive offerings. When it comes to the evolution of AI or climate shocks or, pandemics and conflicts, that as a government, we are prepared to either absorb shocks or to support those critical industries who contribute to, sustainable jobs in our country. Yeah.
And finally, I want to touch on the role of small and medium enterprises and how they are being integrated into the local value chains through the various localization efforts that are in place.
Yes, so in South Africa, we also have another department. It's called the Department of Small Business, and we work, very closely together with that department because, the integration of small and medium enterprises, they are is essential. I mean, localization cannot be credible if it only sustains, established big business. So what we need to do as government is to identify those points of entries into the value chains for businesses, small businesses to enter. And, as you said, it's the Proudly South African Expo yesterday and today. So stakeholders like, Proudly South African, which the DTIC, supports, they play an important role by promoting local products and by certifying businesses that meet the quality and the content standards. And they also give visibility to businesses that once began in like their garage or in a small township to now expand their business because, dreams aren't meant to be contained. They're meant to grow and flourish. And, the one other thing that small businesses also struggle with is not just maybe finance, but also with market access and market recognition. And, the department has the export support measures that helps small businesses and businesses reach the international market. And we also do a lot of exporter training and awareness sessions to make them more export ready. And I would like to, maybe take this opportunity to invite, your small and medium businesses, if they haven't done so already, to please visit the DTIC's website and to, view what programs we have on offer and what funding and incentives they are on offer.
Deputy Minister, we'll leave it at that for this afternoon. Thank you so much for taking us through the role of localization in the market. That's the Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Alexandra Abrahams.